Hello, faithful, and welcome to the 49ers Plus podcast. I'm Al Moriello, and this is your source for the most objective 49ers analysis and discussion. And today, we're going to be talking about the ongoing DC search for San Francisco, how it feels right now that it's Robert Saleh or bust. We're going to be going over prospective DC candidates that did not get an interview with San Francisco that are now off the table. We're going to be talking about a report of a potential, likely new, yet elderly candidate. I have some thoughts about some divisional round quarterbacks who made another exit. And I want to see if what the Niners have done in the past 5 years compared to what's going on in the league has given any 49er fans more of an appreciation for what Kyle and John have established. I'll say the answer to that is no, but we're going to break down why the answer should actually be yes. So let's get right into it. So I'm recording this on Wednesday afternoon, and by now you know that Robert Saleh is and has been the front runner for the 49ers defensive coordinator opening. He is set to interview for a second time with the Jacksonville Jaguars 2 days from now on Friday, January 24th. And the Jaguars had a bit of a shakeup today. Ownership fired former 49er GM and their previous GM in Jacksonville, Trent Baalke. Shad Khan and others apparently have dealt with enough, even though they were dubbing it a mutual parting of the ways. So Baalke is gone. I don't know if that makes the position more or less attractive to someone like Robert Saleh, who could work with Jacksonville ownership and help handpick Baalke's successor, much like what Kyle Shanahan did, being hired by San Francisco and bringing John Lynch along. So that is a possibility. Now, Saleh also interviewed with the Cowboys. That seems like it's going to be Kellen Moore's job after Jerry threw out the idea, or somebody threw out the idea of Deion Sanders. And Saleh also interviewed with the Las Vegas Raiders. The Jaguars had one prospective head coach take himself out of the running, and that is Tampa Bay Buccaneers offensive coordinator Liam Cohen. Declined. I don't recall the timing, if it was before or after the Trent Baalke firing. Would have been funny if it was before. Khan caught wind of this or got a reason why and decided to let go of Baalke. Not like I'm encouraging or celebrating for anybody that's losing their jobs. But now Liam Cohen is the most highly paid offensive coordinator per reports in the NFL. So I, led this off with Saleh or bust, and a lot of people are saying that, and I'm sure you're seeing that a lot, in the media and social media and whatnot. That's what it feels like. The Niners are waiting, but the Niners now have lost out on 3 candidates who have jobs with other teams. Jets former DC and interim head coach Jeff Ulbrich is now the defensive coordinator in Atlanta under Raheem Morris. Lou Anarumo, former Bengals DC, is now the DC in Indianapolis. And Dennis Allen has followed Ben Johnson, former OC of the Lions, to Chicago to be the defensive coordinator. And a lot of people are up in arms, and I myself am confused in terms of why didn't Kyle interview any of these 3 candidates? We know he had interest in Jeff Ulbrich last year. He reached out to then Jets head coach Robert Saleh for an interview request, and he was denied. There were no official interviews on the books announced other than Robert Saleh and Deshae Townsend, who is still the Lions defensive backs coach. And Kyle Shanahan did say he would give defensive assistant, whatever you want to call him, Brandon Staley, a shot to interview as well. And maybe that happened internally and they didn't announce it, but that was going to be a given based on what Kyle said. Not interviewing these candidates or more candidates obviously feels like putting all of their eggs in the Saleh basket, right? And this now, with the Trent Baalke firing, has the potential to blow up in the Niners' faces. John, Kyle, Jed York, everybody. But I think the thing that's more concerning is, and what nobody's talking about, what if they reached out to these candidates and they said no? What if it was, hey, Jeff, hey, Lou, hey, Dennis, we want you to come in and interview for the defensive coordinator position. and they all said no. Now, Ulbrich might be the one where there might have been maybe a side conversation. Kyle thinks very highly of him, and it's not to say he doesn't think highly of Lou Anarumo or Dennis Allen, but there could have been some back channel phone call discussions. I mean, how often is it that you hear that someone declined an interview to be an OC or a DC or a special teams coordinator? You heard it with Liam Cohen declining, pulling out of the running for the Jacksonville spot, the head coaching spot, but that was because of what's going on in Jacksonville. They're New York Jets Southeast with how dysfunctional they are. But if they had said no, or let's say two of the three, Lou Anarumo and Dennis Allen, if they had said no, it's actually understandable. Look at how Kyle and the organization has quickly pulled the plug last year on Steve Wilks and this year on Nick Sorensen. The Nick Sorensen one is wildly deserved, right? Now he wasn't playing with the full deck. He had his injuries, but those of us watching the games saw no evolution, no creativity, and really no growth from the 49ers defense from the beginning to the end of the season. And we actually did see a deterioration from the first quarter to the fourth quarter of each game. Of course, there's the possibility that Lou Anarumo or Dennis Allen, for whatever reason, are not fits for what Kyle Shanahan wants to do, right? It's a possibility, right? Then at the same time, Brandon Staley, who's apparently a Vic Fangio disciple or fan, Vic Fangio runs the 3-4 in Philadelphia. I highly doubt Brandon Staley is going to bring that here. So how much of a fit is Brandon Staley for what Kyle wants to do? And I'm sure, or I would bet a decent amount of money that Staley has had his interview already and they just haven't announced it. How could you not talk to Brandon Staley yet? I mean, they've been out of the regular season ended, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago? How could you not have that conversation? Who does that leave then? I don't think Deshae Townsend is a serious candidate. They need someone experienced. And if it winds up being Brandon Staley, he only has 1 year of DC experience, which we're going to go over. But I think that's a lot better than learning on the fly with they're a win now roster, but it's not a win only in 2025 roster and the door is going to close. I mean, I'll have future podcasts talking about why the 49ers championship window is open. When I start talking about quarterbacks that lost in the divisional round in a bit, we're going to talk about, well, now are those teams windows shut for a variety of reasons? But who's left? So Staley, we talked about, Matt Eberflus, former Bears head coach, and Gus Bradley, former Colts defensive coordinator. Let's quickly go through the stats. So Brandon Staley's only year as defensive coordinator with the Rams, the Rams in their Super Bowl year were first in yards allowed, first in points allowed, third in rushing yards allowed, and first in passing yards allowed. Very good defense anchored by Aaron Donald. They had Leonard Floyd, Jalen Ramsey, had players for sure. How much you want to say Brandon Staley elevated that team? He had to have done something, right? You don't just stumble upon those top three ratings across the board. So he and Sean McVay getting the ring. Remember, Brandon Staley was the one that he followed Wade Phillips, right? Wade Phillips was Sean McVay's first pick as defensive coordinator when he became the head coach of the Rams. And that's McVay, if you want to say having no ego, but understanding at the time, he was the youngest, head coach in the league. What was he, 32 years old, 33, something like that. And he brought in an old hand at DC. It's like, all right, Wade, I know you know what you're doing. I'm going to hand over everything to you. And the Rams defense performed well. Staley winds up getting the Rams over the hump and winds up parlaying that into the Chargers head coaching position. So Matt Eberflus, the last 2 years, taking the Bears stuff off the table, because as a head coach, he wasn't calling plays, he wasn't putting a stamp on the defense as much as he was with the Colts. And he was the Colts DC for a handful of years. The last two were 20 and 21. And I'm going to give you the rankings for 20 and 21 as I go. So in yards allowed, 8th and 16th. Points, 10th and 9th. Run defense yards, 2nd and 10th. Pass defense yards, 20 and 19th. All right, obviously some work to do there in the pass defense, whether that's personnel or scheme. We know not cut out to be a head coach, but as a DC, an option, right? An option. Gus Bradley, been in the league for a while, the architect of the Seahawks Legion of Boom defense from 2009 to 2012, then left to become the Jacksonville Jaguars head coach, was the Chargers DC from 2017 to 2021, and the Colts head coach from 2022 to this past season where he was let go. The last 2 years in Indianapolis, the stats are not good. So 24th and 29th in yards allowed, 28th and 24th in points allowed, 24th in both years in rushing yards allowed, and 16th and 26th in passing yards allowed. You don't want to say the Colts were wildly devoid of talent. I mean, the things that are concerning is they play in a division, so that's 6 games with teams that are not phenomenal in the Titans, the Jaguars, and the Texans. So there should be, I'm not going to call it pat statting, but you would have liked to see in like maybe the mid to low teens across the board. But Gus Bradley had really good years in Seattle, really good years with the Chargers. And that personnel of those two teams is closer to what the 49ers have personnel-wise than what the Colts have had the past couple seasons, for what that's worth. Now, I did mention last podcast that Gus Bradley was one of 2 coaches that blitzed less than Nick Sorensen. That's a concern. So if Bradley is one of the coaches, or is the coach that gets the job, or they're considering it, he's got to, in my opinion, amp up the creativity and aggressiveness, because otherwise you're falling into just an older Nick Sorensen. And lastly, there was a report today from Tim Kawakami from, I believe, The Athletic, saying that there's been discussions internally about former Seahawks head coach Pete Carroll becoming the defensive coordinator. He was the Niners D coordinator from 95 to 96. And I wonder if there's ever been a situation where the D coordinator has come back to a team almost 30 years later, or exactly 30 years later, I guess, from 95 to 2025. Carroll is a serious option to be the Las Vegas Raiders head coach and potentially number 1 choice. This feels like a Bill Belichick move. You might as well turn over, well, you can't say you might as well turn over every rock, because I don't feel like they've turned over many rocks or any rocks at all. The Niners have interviewed more special teams coordinators officially, 3, than they have defensive coordinators, 2, Saleh and Deshae Townsend, which, purposefully or not, satisfies the Rooney Rule. I can't see Pete Carroll becoming a DC. I think he would be a good head coach anywhere as a culture setter and a let's clean up this mess coach and leave it in a better spot. Like a one-term coach. Maybe he coaches for 2 or 3 years, gets the ship in order. He's 73 years old, right? He's not going to coach until his 80s, but if he can coach for 2-3 years, obviously still an energetic guy, get the Raiders into a better spot where they're not a perennial bottom feeder. I mean, they need a quarterback. They need an infusion of talent everywhere. They need help. But Pete Carroll could be one of the faces of the franchise. Very likable guy, high energy, knows what he's doing, well respected, and a caretaker to just get water out of the boat, right? Just make it floatable again. Because and not to say that the Raiders aren't going to hire him, but I would not, just like Bill Belichick, I wouldn't say no to coaches like this. I mean, they're not your long-term, they might not be a long-term solution, but how quickly do coaches get fired anyway? You're only giving coaches maybe 2-3 years max before they show any progress. And if Pete Carroll is working out and he wants to stay, great. Or he may say, you know what, I have a 3-year plan. Hopefully I can see it through, but I'm going to bring the Raiders back to respectability. That's what you're aiming for with the Raiders. You're not aiming for a Super Bowl or playoffs. Just don't be a joke. And Pete Carroll can go a long way towards that. So it's really Saleh, Staley, Eberflus, and Bradley. That's not the order that I would pick, although I would choose Saleh over any one of the other three, the advantage of the other three would be they'll stay more than 1 year. If Saleh is getting head coaching opportunities now, he's going to get head coaching opportunities next year. And do you want to be in the boat, the same boat of rinse and repeat, get a year out of Saleh, knows the players, knows the system, knows the coaching staff, the environment, the facility, everything. And I think last podcast I said it's taking 2 steps forward by hiring Robert Saleh, but if/when he goes at the end of 2025, you're taking 2, 3, or 4 steps back, finding somebody else. If they get a Super Bowl championship, is it worth it? I guess so. How much time, though, does a Super Bowl buy you, John and Jane Doe fan, right? The Super Bowl is great. It's something that you can rewatch and relive in the future yourself, with your family, your kids, whatever. But are you going to be thinking about that future in that Super Bowl in 2026 when they bring in another DC that needs time to get up to speed, that does not have the Niners clicking, that looks more like Nick Sorensen again? That Super Bowl will be long forgotten by week 7 or 8 if it's going to be a one-and-done Saleh situation. The Niners cannot find a suitable replacement. I'm getting well ahead of myself, but I know that's what's on all of our minds. It will be great to get him back, but you're not going to get him back for 4 years the way he started out from 17 to 2020 in his first run with San Francisco. More to come. So, I mean, like I said, Saleh has his interview on Friday. If there's any decision made, if he becomes the head coach or the Niners announce a DC, I'll probably do a quick podcast maybe over the weekend or early next week. But I'm trying to stay on this 1 day a week cycle, just given how much there is not really to talk about and stretch out a show or a podcast for. Excuse me. Let's quickly talk divisional round quarterback. So I went over, I think I labeled the image that accompanied the last podcast as Brock's bitches, and it had Justin Herbert among other quarterbacks who just in the playoffs cannot hold a candle to Brock Purdy. Quarterbacks that lost in the wild card round and cost their team the game, and Justin Herbert obviously with the 4 interception performance. But let's look at now the divisional round and some celebrated, QBs that, again, just didn't perform. So C.J. Stroud with the Texans, lost at the Chiefs. There's no shame in that, right? The Chiefs are probably going to beat the Bills. They're going to get to the Super Bowl. They're going to get a whole bunch of calls that a lot of people are going to look at and go, the fix is in. But this is the second straight year, the second straight divisional round game where C.J. Stroud has not thrown a touchdown. And they needed him to elevate. They ran for $150 on the ground. They had 100 more total yards than the Chiefs, a 7-minute advantage in time of possession. Now, Stroud didn't cost them the game with turnovers, but for a relatively close game throughout, he could not break through. So the C.J. Stroud fellatio, the C.J. Stroud knee pads that people are wearing down to the nub, I think, again, people have to slow down. And again, I don't want to hear about there was no Tank Dell and Stephon Diggs. When you have Nico Collins, and I know he was in and out of that game for some weird reason, and you still have John Mechie, and you have Joe Mixon, and you have Dalton Schultz as a good tight end. Remember that, with Dallas, that was their triplet, right? Like if you had Irvin, Emmitt Smith, and Novacek and your quarterback, you were good. It's like the NFL now. You need what people are calling the Niners, the Avengers. You need the Chiefs the Bengals to have Boyd and Higgins and Jamar Chase and Joe Mixon at the time, and whoever their serviceable tight end was it CJ Uzomah and Joe Burrow. Like, you need to have weapons at every starting position, and that's not the case, especially if a quarterback like CJ Stroud, who has now taken a significant backseat to someone like Jaden Daniels, because Stroud is not the hot new thing anymore. But if he was, he would have been able to elevate his team in round 2 of the playoffs the last 2 years at the Ravens and at the Chiefs, respectively, and he didn't. Not putting everything on him, but don't you want to see at least 1 touchdown pass in 2 divisional round games? I know I do. I wanted to see more than that. I wanted to see the Texans knock off the Chiefs, and I'm sure a lot of you all did also. C.J. Stroud didn't cost them the game. Did not. But he didn't win them the game either. Lamar Jackson. losing at the Bills. We know how it happened. Drove them down the field. 2-point conversion to Mark Andrews. Dropped it. Mark Andrews, who also had a fumble earlier in the game. Jackson had an interception. He had a fumble that led directly to a Bills touchdown. So he's responsible for giving the Bills 7 points, if you want to think about it that way. Jackson is now 3-5 in the postseason, 10 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, 60.6% completion percentage, and an 84.6 rating. He's in 8 postseason NFL games. He's thrown 10 touchdowns, a shade over 1 a game, and 7 interceptions, a shade over 1 a game. That's not going to do it. I don't care who you're playing, where you're playing, what the elements are. Everybody's playing in the elements, right? Didn't really hamper Josh Allen. Didn't hamper Patrick Mahomes playing in the cold and Arrowhead, and played in the cold and Arrowhead for what? Each of the last 7 years, 7 straight AFC championship games. Missed a regular season, and he should win the MVP. His season this year, Lamar Jackson, was better than his season last year when he won the MVP. So he should win it. No one should look at the divisional round game. Josh Allen beat him in the playoffs. I don't know if voters have cast their ballots yet. And if they did, they can look at the regular season game. What was it, week 4, where the Ravens beat him 35-10 in Baltimore. Lamar Jackson is an elite quarterback, but he can't perform in the playoffs. Does that still make him elite then? How big a slice of the pie? How big a part of the equation? How much do you want to weigh playoff performance when you're calling a quarterback elite? Josh Allen has the chance to get to a Super Bowl. Joe Burrow has gotten to a Super Bowl. Patrick Mahomes has been to a bunch. Justin Herbert can't get out of the wild card round. It's a factor, guys. He is a dazzling athletic specimen. But if you're not saying that he chokes somewhat in the playoffs, then you're just being disingenuous. Josh Allen has a ridiculous touchdown to interception ratio. Good, ridiculously good in the playoffs. Obviously, that lost to Kansas City when they were up with 12 seconds to go or whatever it was, and they decided not to squib kick it to take some more time off the clock. That could have been their year. But Stroud, for a second-year player, has not done nearly the same as Brock in his first 2 years. If you take this as me comparing these two quarterbacks, go ahead. I can't stop you. I'm just stating facts. Who has achieved more in the playoffs their first 2 years in the league, Brock Purdy or CJ Stroud? Obviously, Brock. Who has achieved more in the league in their careers? 2.5 years for Brock. What is it, 7 years now? 6 or 7 years now for Lamar Jackson? Brock's 4-2 in the postseason, one of those losses coming at Philadelphia with no UCL in his elbow. Jackson's 3-5. 10 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. For Jackson, I think it's 6 touchdowns and 1 interception for Brock. 1 interception in 5 games, 7 interceptions in 8 games for Lamar Jackson. Is Jackson a better quarterback? More dynamic quarterback? Yes. But do you think there are some Raven fans out there that might take Purdy in the playoffs now instead of Lamar Jackson? Probably not the majority, but there's some. And as a Niner fan, as tantalizing as Lamar Jackson would be in the regular season in red and gold, wouldn't you have pause? Wouldn't it give you pause in the postseason? No matter what Kyle dials up, right? He's turnover prone. And lastly, Jared Goff. At home against the Commanders, an 8.5-point favorite, 1 touchdown, 3 interceptions, and a fumble. So he was responsible for 4 turnovers. The Lions ran the ball for 200 yards and 3 touchdowns. Of Goff's 4 turnovers, the fumble led right to a touchdown. He threw a pick 6. He added an interception at the end of the half, which didn't hurt them, and had an interception that led to a touchdown in Washington's next drive. Jared Goff was responsible for 21 Washington points. And yes, the defense let up 20. Well, the defense let up 45. If you want to say the defense let up 38 because of the pick six, okay. But they lost 45-31. Jared Goff, we're not going to say reverted to form. He had a phenomenal year. He's had a phenomenal couple years straight in Detroit. Shit the bed. Now, his resume is basically the same as Purdy's when it comes to postseason. Been to an NFC Championship game in San Francisco last year and lost. Been to a Super Bowl against the Patriots with the Rams and lost. Brock beat him head-to-head last year in the playoffs. Goff beat him head-to-head this year in the regular season. But the Detroit stuff, I ended with Goff because Dan Campbell last year, I give him credit for like such a tough dude. And you could tell he's someone that you wouldn't want to brawl with. I mean, not me, given my height, weight, age, whatever. And him being an ex-football player, like 6'6". Big, tough dude, emotional, right? You saw it in the post-game presser for losing against Washington. You saw it last year, if you watched him, after San Francisco, because he knows, we just blew a really good shot. One, because you're in the NFC Championship game, and two, because you blew a 24-7 lead at halftime. It's hard to make the playoffs. It's hard to win a playoff game. It's even harder to string together multiple wins. And they were the number 1 seed. They just needed 2 wins to get to the Super Bowl. 1 win to host the NFC Championship game against Philadelphia. And Detroit would have been on fire in a good way. Not set to fire, but abuzz. It would have been the most expensive ticket in Lions history. But they couldn't get it done. There's a lot of blame to be had. Goff's performance, Aaron Glenn's performance. As much as people want to, when the Lions were steamrolling to 15-2, people were, TV stations were always having the supers up of, how many defensive players are on IR. And that was a factor, but they still went 15-2. You can't use that excuse in the Washington game. It didn't prevent them from getting 15 wins and beating a lot of good teams along the way and keeping holding the Vikings to 9 points in week 18 to win the division and the number 1 seed. Excuses are interesting things, or when people make up excuses. When things are going right, you don't even look at the excuse. You can say, oh, we're doing this in spite of all these injuries, in spite of missing these players. But then it really gets amped up when the loss happens, like it does for Detroit. People are complaining about Ben Johnson, that he was checked out, that he wasn't even game planning. These are Lion fans I'm seeing on Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it, complaining that there was a fix-in, especially because he went to the Bears, that Ben Johnson didn't want them to win. And now Aaron Glenn is the head coach of the Jets. And how much was he really, committed to the game plan, etc. Lion fans, folks out there, it's tough. And I'm wondering, Niner fans, level-headed Niner fans that can see things not in black and white because we live in shades of gray, can see things a bit more even keel now that we're like 2+ weeks away from the regular season ending on a really bad 6-11 season, that we can have an appreciation for what Kyle and John put together from 2019 to 2023 outside of the 2020 season with COVID, which again was an injury-ravaged season. 2 Super Bowl appearances, 2 additional NFC Championship game appearances in 5 years. Didn't get the Super Bowl ring. And I know that's why everybody plays it. Everybody plays the game. Well, I mean, there's some teams out there that aren't going to win a Super Bowl. We're going to get to that in a second. But guys, it shows how good of a regular season the Vikings had, one and done in the playoffs. How good of a regular season the Lions had, one and done. Packers had, one and done. Ravens had, 2 and done. It's hard. You're obviously playing the best teams in your conference. Seedings, matchups sometimes matter. Sometimes teams aren't a good matchup for you, and you could be the higher seed and the favored team. I mean, look at the national championship between Notre Dame and Ohio State. Notre Dame was ranked 7th in the 12-team bracket. Ohio State was ranked 8th. Ohio State was an 8.5-point favorite-ish. Wind up getting the field goal or whatever at the end for the 11-point win in the backdoor cover. So sometimes they're just the seedings don't really reflect who the true favorite should be in a matchup. I mean, the Bills were favored going into Buffalo, right? And they played them, toe-to-toe, and Andrews with that 2-point conversion and 3 total turnovers for none for the Bills. It's hard. And teams like the Chiefs, if people are going to say, well, the Chiefs do it, well, the Chiefs are an anomaly. That's why they're a dynasty. You don't have multiple dynasties going on at the same time. You had the Niners were the team of the 80s. You had the Cowboys team of the 90s. The Steelers were the team of the 70s. The team of the 2000s or 2010s was, I guess, the Patriots, right? And now it's going to be the Chiefs in the 2020s. There's one dynasty at a time. The Chiefs are what the Patriots are. And that's why a lot of people are starting to hate them beyond the whole they're winning a lot, but obviously the refs and the getting calls thing and the Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce, all that stuff. But they're the anomaly. Have, the last 4 years or however many of playoff runs affected the Niners physically? Maybe. And I'm sure it's affecting the Chiefs the same way. Do they have a better, strength and conditioning staff? Are they able to overcome better? Is Andy Reid's message resonating more? Are they more driven because they're the ones that are they're the team that's winning the Super Bowl and the Niners aren't? But for teams like the Bills and the Ravens, the Bengals had a couple-year run, a Super Bowl and an AFC Championship game. The Eagles made it to a Super Bowl, have been in the playoffs, are in the NFC Championship game again. The Cowboys prior to this year, 3 straight 12-win seasons. The Packers, right, haven't gotten to the NFC Championship game since Raheem Mostert went nuts on them in 2019. Teams that have had sustained success, but here, a step or two below the success that the Niners have had. And then the Chiefs are one step further up. And then you have other teams like the Texans, the Vikings, the Lions trying to break through. Texans trying to get to a championship game. The Vikings trying to get to the divisional round, which I think they were in 2019, or a championship game again. The Lions trying to get to a championship game or a Super Bowl. It's hard, guys. It's hard. And Lion fans, a lot of whining about Aaron Glenn, about Ben Johnson. I mentioned this earlier, and I'm seeing this, and it's making me chuckle. The hashtag for the Lions, the official hashtag, is One Pride. And I almost want to change it to One Wine because, now their coaching staff is getting poached, and they're going to be losing players in free agency, and they paid Jared Goff, and they paid Amon-Ra St. Brown, and after this upcoming season, they can pay Aiden Hutchinson and Jahmyr Gibbs. So how much longer is that window going to be open? And before I get into how Niner fans think about this, why is everybody saying the Niners window is closed? Because they have to pay Brock, and because the theory is other players need to get paid. And I mentioned this on other podcasts and shows. I'm going to keep mentioning this in the future. That structure makes sense when the team isn't built, when the team hasn't been able to pay players or hasn't needed to pay players yet. Look at the Texans. They were able to bring in Joe Mixon and Stephon Diggs. Nico Collins did get paid. Tank Dell he's coming off of his second major knee injury, but they're going to have to start paying some of their players, even if Stephon Diggs sticks around or not. Darren Stingley at cornerback. They did bring in Danielle Hunter. Next year, Will Anderson's going to be up for an extension if he wants one or if they decide to give him one. So that's when they talk about the window, the core of the window is open when you do have a cheap quarterback and you can really load the team up, right? And the Niners have had that with McCaffrey being brought in, with Trent Williams, with Fred Warner, with Nick Bosa, with Ayuk, with Kittle, with Samuel, with Jennings getting a nice payday, with Demo, right? They had Ward. Demo is on the rookie year of his contract now. He got paid. And you're hoping that young players, this is the hope, and the Niners at least have hit on this draft class with Pooney and Mustafa and Renardo Green, Ricky Pearsall, Jacob Cowing, Evan Anderson, that they can bring in cheap young players to help keep the window open. Because if you can get an excellent play or good to excellent play, years 1, 2, 3 out of these cheap young players, you don't have to extend them until year 3 or year 4. You can keep the pipeline young and talented in addition to your veterans. So the Niners window is still open. Whatever Brock gets, it's still open. But if you want to take the opposite view, why isn't the Lions window closed? Goff got paid. What about the Ravens? Jackson got paid. What about the Packers? Out in the wild card round, Love got paid. Right? The Bills, I think Josh Allen's going to renegotiate his contract in the offseason. Probably the same with Patrick Mahomes. The Bengals, I mean, I know they didn't make the playoffs again. Is that window officially closed? Burrow got paid. They're going to pay Chase. We'll see what the Lions do. They paid Justin Jefferson. Are they going to pay Sam Darnold? So you see what I'm getting at, right? Like there are teams that have paid quarterbacks that the media says their window is still open, but the Niners isn't. The difference is the Niners have paid their core talented players yet, where these other teams haven't. Maybe the theory is, well, these other teams like a Detroit or a Minnesota or Houston or whatever can keep bringing in players, bringing in expensive, talented players. One, that's no guarantee for success. I mean, how many years have the Yankees been trying to do that? And they're going on what? 12-ish, 14 years without a World Series championship and losing out to the Mets on Juan Soto. But let me just pivot this back to, I'm going to call it misguided 49er fans who have the Super Bowl or bust mentality. Every preseason, we all get excited. Every fan of every team. The draft brings hope. Free agency brings hope. Training camp, new year, new hope. And people that say, well, if you're okay with second place or just making it to a Super Bowl or just making it to the NFC Championship game, then you're a bunch of losers. But listen, I got a news flash for you. I don't buy NFC West champion t-shirts. I don't buy NFC champion hats or sweatshirts or, Super Bowl participant or what. I don't actually have a lot of 49er paraphernalia. I should rectify that. I'm wearing a hat. Obviously, you can see that. But if you're the mentality of these super fan machismo mouth-breathing dickheads of, if you're okay with just getting there and not winning it, of course fans are not just okay with getting there and being the bridesmaid and not the bride or getting to an NFC championship. And everyone wants number 6, quest for 6. We all want it. I get it. How realistic is that every year to win a Super Bowl, or every other year to win a Super Bowl, or every third year to win a Super Bowl? I just rattled off the teams that had good years last year that didn't even make it as far as they did last year, right? Vikings. Well, Vikings actually make it farther because they weren't in the playoffs. But the Packers, the Lions, the Ravens made it to the AFC Championship game. They're done in the divisional round. The correct point of view that fans should have, and I'm not telling anybody how to think, how to feel. You do you. But what works for me and I think makes sense is you want to start each year. Season's over, you go through free agency, you go through the draft, you go through, you're in training camp, you're feeling good about the roster, and you feel like as a fan of a certain team, whatever the sport is, right? You feel like they got a shot this year. Talk about the Niners. Niners have a shot this year. And we felt that way. Did we feel that way going into 2019? No. That was an out-of-the-blue run, similar to what the Commanders are doing this year. And almost every year, you feel like there's a team that makes that run. It was the Lions last year. It was the Niners in 2019. The Rams when they won their Super Bowl. I mean, they brought in Matthew Stafford, but you still didn't know, like, was he going to be the missing piece? Got them the Super Bowl ring. The Bengals, the year that they went to the Super Bowl and beat Mahomes in the AFC Championship game. You want to go into the season feeling like you're not only in the mix, but you have a realistic shot to be playing championship game weekend, right? And Kyle and John have given us that since 2019. The reality of the situation is every year, we'll say 12 to 15 teams, have zero shot winning the Super Bowl. Zero. The Niners are certainly not one of those teams. But do you want to be a Cardinal fan, a Jet fan, a Giant fan, a Raider fan, a Panthers fan, a Jaguars fan, a Titans fan, Falcons, if you want to say that, Seattle to a certain extent? Teams that say the Chargers, just because they're in the Chiefs division. Teams, the Browns, that have no shot. That's what you want to stay out of. And that's why, like, this is like the pool of teams that don't have for those of you that are watching, that don't have a shot. That's why you pay a quarterback like Brock, who's a top 8 to 12 quarterback in the league. And if he gets paid top 7 money out of the range where we're grading him or I'm grading him, I don't care. You pay a little bit of a surplus. I so believe this. It's like a gratuity on a bill when you go out for dinner, a tip. 15, 20%. And I know only us Americans do that. Europeans don't. But it's that gratuity of, I got to stay out of the cesspool of shit. I got to stay. Because all those teams I listed that I mentioned that have no shot, the majority of them do not have a quarterback. You have a quarterback, you have a chance. You want an opportunity for sustained success. And sustained success does not mean winning 4 straight Super Bowls. That would be awesome. The Bills had sustained success. I know they're a running joke. 4 straight Super Bowls in the 90s. ESPN's 30 for 30, the 4 falls of Buffalo. I know they're looked at as a joke, but do we understand how hard that is to do? How hard it is to get to the playoffs 4 straight years? The AFC Championship game, 4 straight Super Bowls, coming back each year after they lose. And still coming back and making another run. That should be commended, not mocked. Look at the Niners in the 90s. Only won Super Bowl in 94, but they were in the NFC Championship game 91, 92. I'm sorry, 92, 93. 95, they were in the divisional round. They got knocked out by the Packers. And was it either 96 or 98, or potentially both? They were in the NFC Championship game. I'm just doing this off the top of my head. Are the 90s a failure? For some, I guess so. It was only 1 Super Bowl. And then they regress, obviously, when Steve Young retired, had some okay years with Jeff Garcia, some good years with Jeff Garcia. But let's also remember the Mike Nolan years, Mike Singletary, Jim Tomsula, Chip Kelly. That's what you want to stay out of. And I know I've said before, you just want a ticket to the dance. If you don't have a ticket to the dance, you have no chance of dancing with the prom queen, right? Or becoming prom king yourself. Holding up the trophy, holding up the crown, tiara, whatever it may be. Fans that have the mentality, and it's an easy narrative to get behind. Oh, you're a pussy fan, or you're a bad fan because you're okay with being in the NFC Championship game. You're okay with making it to the Super Bowl and not winning it. No, I'm not okay with that. Of course, I want the Super Bowl championship. Not like we don't get a ring, we don't get a trophy. The best you can do is buy a jacket or a sweatshirt or a hat that says Super Bowl champs. And you can rewatch the game, like I said. You can relive it. Great. And if the Niners had beaten the Chiefs either one of those 2 times, I guarantee you I would have watched either one or both of those Super Bowls more than I already have. As it stands, I've rewatched both of them a bunch of times. Oh, I can't bring myself to watch it. Get the fuck over yourself. It's a game. But Lynch and Shanahan have set this team up for sustained success. That's all you can ask for. What I will say, though, is for 2020 and 2024, when there are injuries, and they were not minor ones, right? Injuries to major players, both sides of the ball, both years, 2020 and 2024. Why does it go so to shit? Why were they 6-10 in 2020 and 6-11 in 2024 this past season with still the amount of talent on the roster? Why were they not a 9-win team? 8-9 this year, maybe 9-7 in 2020. I know they had the QB carousel. Beathard QB'd a little bit. Nick Mullins, once Jimmy got hurt. I understand that. That's the biggest position, hardest position to substitute in sports, right? The WAR, win above replacement. Worse for that versus any position in any sport. But why is the drop-off so significant? All the injuries Detroit had to deal with, and a lot of the injuries on defense were to some backup players too, right? They still went 15-2. Now, they didn't miss Goff for any extended period of time. They didn't miss Laporta. They didn't miss Amon-Ra St. Brown. They didn't miss Penei Sewell. They still had Jameson Williams. They did miss David Montgomery for some games, but that was after they had 10, 11, 12 wins anyway, right? Why does it go so bad when injuries hit? And again, the injuries aren't minor, but they're still more talented than a 6-win team in those two respective years. That would be my knock against Kyle. He and I, parroting him, talk about positionless football. You could put Debo in the backfield, McCaffrey as a receiver. You can line Kittle up as a receiver too at times, or Jennings can come down and block. If that's the case, then you should have more chess pieces at your disposal to move around when people get hurt, that things don't fall apart so spectacularly, right? And if you want to call them extenuating circumstances or not, the 3 losses in the NFC West, when they had the lead, was it a Kyle thing? Was it a Sorensen thing? Was it a non-aggressive thing? Not being able to put them away thing? A special teams thing with Moody and company? Multifactorial. Doesn't fall all on one position at all. But this is not a team that's going to go through next season or 2026 or in the future squeaky clean with a clean bill of health. They're going to get hurt. They need to do a much better job mitigating their injuries and not having, there's going to be fall off. We know. But the fall off can't be this severe. And if we're talking about getting better depth, okay, fine. If we're talking about getting players more ready to play on offense, then to me, that's when McCaffrey comes back next year, assuming he's healthy, you got to give Guarendo some carries. You got to give Pearsall and Cowing some experience at receiver. Whoever the backup tight end is for Kittle, you got to get him in there. Get Brock and Kyle and the offense comfortable with whoever that is. Because if Kittle gets hurt, I've said before, they're playing with one hand tied behind their back. Because no tight end outside of Jordan Reed in 2020, when Kittle was hurt, who had a very good year, I guess Nick Mullins was like, fuck it, I'm just going to throw it to whoever. No preconceived notion of who's open or not. I'm going to throw it to Jordan Reed, and he had a really good season in limited duty. That's my knock. We all want number 6. I get it. Number 6, to me, is just as important as being in the mix. You need to be in the mix to get number 6. I did think about wanting that to rhyme as I was saying it, but that's what it's about, Niner fans. It's Super Bowl or bust in a way. Even Jed York says we hang Super Bowl banners on NFC Championship game banners. I get it. But you have to build the culture, the roster, the team the right way to have a shot at that every year. And Kyle and John have done that. And it's one of the reasons with all the players coming back, it's not about who's gone or who's going to get paid or whatever. It's about who's coming back and the free agency and the draft and the 4th place schedule that has me and should have you excited for what the Niners have in store for 2025. But that concludes the podcast for today. As always, I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to make us part of your listening routine. NFC Championship game weekend. Boy, I hope it's a Commanders-Bills Super Bowl. The worst case scenario for Niner fans is Chiefs-Eagles. Because I'm sure you're going to see that McCaffrey meme of I want both teams to lose because that will be hard. That's just a game you're watching because it's the last football game until August, preseason, and not having any dog in the fight or can't bear yourself to have a dog in the fight is going to be a tough one to swallow. But enjoy the championship games, guys, for what they are. Hopefully between now and we speak again, we'll have more clarity on the DC search. It'll hopefully be Robert Saleh. And if not, it cannot be a first-time D coordinator. Until now, when we speak again, stay happy, healthy, and safe. Talk soon, everyone. Take care.